From birth, women and girls face barriers that men don't. From lower pay to surviving the climate crisis, they bear the brunt of poverty. But they're also the solution, because when one woman escapes poverty, she brings another 4 people with her, and that's a powerful multiplier. CARE helps women by creating opportunities to build knowledge and self-confidence. Arpita wants to be a scientist. Ms. Rawati dreams of starting her own business. And Melina finally has control over how her family's money is spent. We create opportunities for women to become leaders, because when women lead, everyone benefits. Rosalind leads her community to fight for survival in our changing climate. Emily builds safer homes for her neighbours to withstand cyclones. And women in Shea Drums district feel safer now that she has their backs. For themselves, for their communities, and for a fair world, we support women in their fight for justice. Because all a woman needs is the right opportunity, and she'll leave no one behind.
Cath Hoban, welcome to the Impact Leaders webinar. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Jeremy. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
As always, the intention of these webinars, these meetings, is to learn from you, to inspire and educate and move people to understand the complex work that happens in the NGO sector. And demystify a sector that mostly people are unaware of, seem to have a very limited understanding of, and especially as we'll dive into today, why women and girls? You and I know why. I'm sure you know more than I do, so I look forward to learning from you as well. But firstly, could you just start and share with us, what does CARE Australia do?
Excellent. Good starting point, Jeremy. So CARE Australia, our mission is to support women to save lives, defeat poverty and achieve social justice. So as you pointed out, and the video that just was played, we have a particular focus on women because of the systemic discrimination that women face is actually one of the sort of foundational contributors to ongoing poverty. So we believe that focusing on women enables us to sort of break that generational upon generation poverty that exists with families, and that when women have the rights to earn an income, when they have the rights to make decisions that affect their lives, when they're not as prone to injury or death in disaster or crisis, you can actually start to really shift the dial on poverty alleviation. We are part of a global organisation, so CARE sits within CARE International. We operate in 75 countries around the globe. So as an Australian-based organisation, we absolutely lean into humanitarian crisis all over the globe, but we do have a particular focus on the Asia-Pacific region because that's sort of our area, our neighbours, so to speak. So we really do try and focus on work in that area.
Could you share the history of CARE, because my understanding it came from providing care packages during, if I'm not mistaken, the First World War? But
second, actually. So yeah, so CARE started from the USA, so in response to the mass migration and poverty that existed in Europe after the Second World War. So the first care package was developed using leftover rations from American military and service. So, you know, if you look on our website and you see the original care package, there's some sugar and spam and some tea. So it originally started sending those care packages of essential supplies to families in Europe. And it actually turned into becoming a service that located displaced people. And so from those really humble beginnings, we've kind of, you know, continued that theme of providing care and care packages. But of course now it's changed considerably from, a box of sugar and spam to sort of more, fundamental support services.
And what inspired you to work for Care Australia specifically?
So I've been in the charity sector for over 25 years, and I've definitely always tried to work for organisations that I feel very passionate about, that align with issues that I think are important. And that, I've worked for environmental organisations before Care. I worked in refugee and asylum seekers. So social justice is really important to me. And I chose to come to Care because I wanted to work for an organisation that wasn't the sort of end-of-line Band-Aid solution of aid that we're often so used to seeing, but really tries to work at the systemic level and tries to fundamentally change or shift the dial in some of those issues that actually keep people poor. So I've been here since 2019, just before COVID hit, the end of 2019. And I'm really proud of the work that we do across that humanitarian space, but also into the sort of system change space that I spoke about.
Thanks for sharing that. It's quite common we hear, people in this sector have been in it for many years. Obviously, everyone seems to be very passionate about the work that they do, about the change that they're creating. I'd love to do a deeper dive into, I've been on the ground a number of times, not yet with Care, but Plan. And I mentioned Plan, it's a similar size as Care, a similar focus to the work you do. Can you share what makes Care unique in respect to its focus, its methodology, its impact? Because long-term systemic change is difficult, and it's not sexy, and it doesn't provide the school on the hill necessarily, right? It's about working on the ground, in community, with community, alongside community, empowering leaders. Could you share some of the what's considered now best practice development and how Care goes about enacting it?
Yeah, great. Lots of questions in there, but I'll start maybe with the original one of kind of what makes Care unique. I think is the sum of many parts. So, we do work across humanitarian response in crisis and conflict, but we're also there to do the long-term development work. We spoke about the focus on gender, which is not, particularly absolutely unique to Care, because Plan, a very worthy organisation that you just mentioned, also focuses on girls. So we have that global reach, but we specifically focus in terms of methodology on creating local partnerships and strengthening local communities so they can respond for themselves. So rather than the old notion of, a crisis hits and an international aid organisation sweeps in from, Australia or another country to sort of deliver aid in a chaotic way, we actually try to work with communities before disaster strikes in terms of the disaster risk reduction work that we do in the Asia Pacific region ahead of cyclones, and also working with women's-based organisations to really address that gender inequality at the grassroots level. And it is hard, it's absolutely hard. And if you look at research conducted by the Fundraising Institute of Australia recently, you had sort of attitude of Australian donors pre-COVID where many of them were cause aligned and say 1/3 identified as being need responders, and post-COVID and bushfires and floods and all sorts of things, now 2/3 of Australians say that they will respond to an ask of need when asked. So getting people to focus on those issues that underline poverty, as you said, is really hard. It's not as sexy as the school on the hill or the the flying in of supplies after a crisis. It's takes a long time and is expensive. But we certainly believe that that's where we can really shift the dial. So it's not this game of whack-a-mole, where one crisis hits and you hit the whack-a-mole and then another one pops up straight afterwards, but you can sort of start seeing over time things really changing for the communities that we work with.
It's such a good point. I mean, the NGO sector responds well to crises. These are powerful and important fundraising moments in order to raise that necessary funding to address the crisis. And yet what my sense is largely unknown by the broader community is that the work that's happening behind the scenes every day in communities. As you say, that long-term work to strengthen communities, empower communities. Can you share your understanding of why women and girls specifically? Most of
Yeah.
us have heard of it to some degree, but just sort of really getting a deep understanding from your expertise of why, as an organisation, do you focus on unlocking the potential of women and girls specifically?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question because, it's often framed under gender equality, and it's a phrase that people sort of, blur over a little bit. But really practically, systemic and deep discrimination of women looks like, young boys being preferenced for education than their sisters. It looks like girls leaving school early to provide unpaid labour for their home or their family's business. It looks like girls and women not being able to inherit money from their family. Only, those resources go to the men in the family. It's informal labour systems. It's not receiving fair wages. As I said, it's that, large scale unpaid domestic work that they do. It's gender-based violence. On so many levels, women have so much ingrained disadvantage from birth. And we believe focusing on that means that, as a woman's able to be educated, earn a decent living, she returns those funds back into the family and back into the community. So, our methodology and theory is that when you lift one woman out of poverty, you're actually helping 4 others. And it's a really powerful multiplier that clearly takes time, but over generations you can really make that shift. So that's why we really focus in that area. We definitely, we do work with men, and you can't shift changing attitudes towards women unless you're actually working at a community level, working with men as well, with boys and men to change their attitudes, but also change the decision making. And one of our programs, for example, particularly in the disaster response, is making sure that women are at the table making the decisions about how an emergency response will occur, making sure that they're there to represent the aged and the disabled and the disadvantaged, making sure that, when an emergency response occurs, that it's gender positive. And when I say gender positive, it's sort of making sure that women have the rights and dignity in an emergency response that you might not otherwise think coming from a male perspective.
And there's a lot there we could unpack and probably spend hours on. But I think just to make a point very clear, so what I'm hearing is, yes, there is the piece around gender equality, but there's also the economic impact on communities. And it is a fact that's been well proven many times over in many communities that you can't have successful, thriving communities, economies, countries without the full inclusion of women and girls. And it's a very simple fact. And if you look at some of the most dysfunctional countries around the world, it is where women are hidden away from public and private life. And so it's about gender equality, but it's also about the unlocking economic potential. And
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think you can, in a country like Australia where we consider ourselves so advanced, we still struggle with the notions of universal childcare and maternity leave and domestic violence leave and all of those things that enable women's participation, fully in the workforce, the gender pay gap. And as I said, we're an advanced country. You take those scenarios and you multiply the negative impacts by a factor of 50 to 100 or whatever it might look like. But you're absolutely right. It is about gender equality, but it's about the benefit that removing those barriers to workforce participation and to be able to build a livelihood, how much that actually benefits the local community and creates further employment. And, most of the countries that we work, there's no childcare. The role of looking after children always sits with the mother of the household, and is an incredible barrier to her gaining employment and having the wherewithal to actually make decisions and to be able to support the family. So it's good. It's great for the family. It's obviously great for women, but it's, the knock on and the multiplier effects to communities is
Exponential.
Extensive. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious because I was in Papua New Guinea recently with UN Women and shocked at not only how undeveloped it is, especially in the highlands, the enormous rates of violence against women, and also it being the second most dangerous country in the world for women to give birth. Now, I feel in Australia we have it's always an out there issue, or it's in Africa, right? The fact is, Africa is actually, in many parts of the continent, becoming almost middle income, and is developing. And there's a large demographic of youth. There's a lot of entrepreneurialism. Not to mention, of course, there's extreme poverty and a lot of issues. But in Asia Pacific, we have some of the lowest, or some of the greatest challenges, which we thought perhaps only existed in Africa, on our doorstep. Could you share a story about perhaps one project in APAC and how challenging it's been in terms of the rates of or a particular issue, and how you're addressing it?
Yeah, so I think the points that you touched on there are really important, in the sense of it is challenging to, I guess, educate Australians that, in fact, some of the most disadvantaged places are quite close to home. They're our neighbours, in fact. And you spoke about Papua New Guinea, and yes, the rates of gender-based violence there are phenomenal. Timor-Leste, which is another country that we work with, their rates of stunting and malnutrition in children under the age of 12 are also, incredibly high. And we associate sort of famine and malnutrition with, many of these African-based campaigns, and it's literally happening on our doorstep. So one of the projects, we work particularly in the Pacific region. We work at the level of training women in leadership. So that's leadership in a sort of very grassroots way, in terms of local involvement in politics and in whatever sort of tribal structure or family structure it has. But it's particularly, we focus on emergencies. So as I mentioned before, making sure that women are leading the approach to a cyclone before it occurs, that they're actively involved in those decisions that affect their communities. And we found that communities that do involve women before a disaster, the response is a much better outcome for women and girls, because women and children are 14 times more likely to die or be injured when a crisis or conflict hits than men. And when women are there in the planning stages and in the response stages to emergencies and disasters, that number significantly drops. So that's a really practical example. It's challenging. You're challenging social norms. You're challenging generations of culture and gender hierarchy and discrimination. Often in countries like PNG, it exists. It's a very male-dominated culture of favours and reciprocity between, communities and leaders, between men and men. So it takes a lot of time to do that. But we've got, great examples, and on the website people can see we've taken women through and their husbands through training, and being able to convey not only to the women but to their partners the benefits of actually sharing the workload, the benefits of making these decisions together, the benefits of the fact that when a woman determines how the weekly income is spent, that the children are actually better off than they were perhaps if the male was making those decisions. So, yeah, it's hard, but it's rewarding, and it's, it's
14 times.
super
That's extraordinary.
glamorous. It's great. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It is terrible. Yeah.
No, thank you for sharing that. And the fact that these countries are on our doorstep, PNG, East Timor, Vanuatu, dozens of Indonesian islands. And I know there is with the change of government, there is a big shift towards strengthening APAC and women in that part of the world. And so it's a really, really critical work that you're doing. What are some of the key
climate
challenges?
change, Jeremy, like climate change, these are the countries that are actually, and you would have seen mostly with the recent Pacific conference that our Prime Minister attended, the issues of climate change and the impact of natural disasters on our neighbouring countries is huge, and it is only going to require more assistance and more development and aid into the future.
So as an organisation, in order to meet these challenges, what would you say are some of the key challenges organisationally and opportunities moving forward?
Yeah, so I think one of them is connected to the last point I was making, that it is quite challenging to get Australians to think beyond our borders, and particularly when the economic situation is tough, as it is in Australia. People pull back on their discretionary spending. Often donations to charities would be considered by many people as being in that sort of bucket of discretionary spend. So it's a combination of being able to constantly raise the money for the sexy work, which is the humanitarian response work, but also the really long-term work that's required, with ever lowering levels of support. So the amount of money that goes to international aid and development compared to, say, health and medical research and everything is about 6% of the charitable dollar in Australia. And so that's, it's a small piece of a pie that needs to go a long way. And, I think just like every other organisation in Australia, the cost of compliance, the cost of cybersecurity, technology, it just
Seems
increases.
to be going up.
Yes, right. So you've kind of got like this shrinking little pie that you have to do more and more with, or try and do more and more with. So I think the economics is really challenging. I think not just for Care Australia, but for the international aid and development sector, full stop. We are, of course, Care is actively trying to shift the dial of the traditional approach to aid and development, that paternalistic, colonial way that aid has always been delivered. And so that's, why we focus on working with local partnerships and shifting the response to them sort of making decisions about how they want their programming to be led and to be implemented.
Can I just ask you to double down on that point? The power of partnerships is critical to deliver great work. Could you speak to that a little further?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for us, the partnerships exist across, obviously with government, but also with businesses like iEqual Change and corporate partnerships. And I think we all know that, particularly post-COVID, and in Melbourne we had the lockdowns, but other parts of Australia also had similar challenges. We saw an absolute shift in Australians valuing things differently. Their values changed in terms of who they would work for, or the consumer choices that they would make. And so I think that's really shone a light on the ability for private sector and for organisations like Care to, align in a space of shared values and almost double the effort. And, an example of that has been a great partnership we've had with Cotton On Foundation, where, our interest lied in improving the livelihoods of women and workplace environments for women in Asia, and Cotton On manufactured in Asia. So we were able to work with them to build a sexual harassment and gender-based violence program in garment factories, which, ticks so many boxes for them, really for us. And at the end of the day, the consumer receives a product knowing that it's not manufactured under a dubious workplace environment for the women who made it. So, I think that's the power of partnership. It's about the multiplier. And it's about, finding that sweet spot between people, between organisations that share the same values and really, want to make a difference. So hugely important.
You're obviously very passionate about your work. Can I ask, where does this come from? Was it a moment or a series of moments?
Definitely my family. I was raised in a household where social justice and community was really important. I think, it was a country town in Victoria. My parents pretty much volunteered on everything from schools to hospitals to sports clubs. We had foster children in our family. I think I attended my first protest at the age of 12. I have 5 siblings, of which 3 of them work in charities. So I think it was just innate in our upbringing, and I think that's, just what's held through. But I feel particularly passionate about gender now. I think, I came to care, as I said earlier, wanting to work at the root cause of poverty, and I probably didn't really understand as clearly as I understand now how gender discrimination and gender, all sorts of discrimination are so, fundamental to keeping people in poverty. And so I think the more I'm at care, the more passionate I become about that issue.
So what would you say are some of the unique challenges and even joys of your work, therefore?
Look, I mentioned the difficulty. The fundraising environment in Australia is hugely challenging. It becomes more and more challenging every year, not just in the economic situation we're having at the moment, but the amount of donors that give to charities in Australia is not growing at all. I think it's remained stagnant, or if not declined, over the last 5 years at least. So, systematically, I think we need, to somehow shift the dial and the conversation at various levels of the importance of charity, the importance of, looking after community and contributing more than yourself, beyond yourself. So there are lots of challenges within the fundraising sector generally. As I said, I think, lifting people's focus beyond their borders, beyond our borders, and to countries that have it so much worse off than we do. And it's not just in the space of gender. It's, whether it's hospitals and education systems and access to fresh water, and that we take so much for advantage in Australia. So that's really challenging, but that's the bit that inspires me as well, that it's never enough. Every day there's just more to do. It doesn't stop, but that's not in a kind of a bad way, because you see the impact that you're having, and that's the inspiring thing to sort of keep going, do more, find more. So
that's true. You're never going to be out of a job, will you?
No. Well, I hope so one day, but I doubt it.
Yeah.
But that's right. Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. I mean, given the challenging funding environment, I'm so pleased to share that I Could Change has been able to raise over $64,000 and counting to support your work. That's starting to sound like a decent amount of money. Can you share, though, what impact does funding like this have for the organisation and the people you serve?
Yeah, great. One of the things that I love about I Equal Change, even just in the naming, is, that it sort of follows that saying of, never underestimate the power of an individual to create change. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And I think often in the charitable sector, we think it's someone else's job to respond to that disaster, or someone else's job to, support homeless. And in fact, it's the power of organisations like yours that actually collectively harness the small contributions of many that combined do have a big impact. So, it's amazing, that $64,000. And, in this year alone, for example, we have responded to many disasters and conflicts. The earthquakes in Syria, Turkey was a big one that we responded to earlier in the year. So those contributions mean that we can not only keep the doors running, obviously, but we are in constant preparation for the next humanitarian response. While at the moment we aren't able to respond to the conflict in Gaza, we are actively preparing to and pre-positioning stocks and supplies for the moment that we will be able to respond to Gaza. And so it's that foundation of support from organisations like I Equal Change and that collective humanitarian response of a little bit from many that actually enables us to do that work, that really critical work. So it's hugely important.
So how can I Equal Change businesses continue to help?
Oh, I think at a sort of high level, it's about really championing that notion that a little bit collectively can go a long way. But really supporting customers to support care. To jump on our website, have a look at the work we do, understand the countries that we're working in and the challenges that some of which I've spoken to today, and really feel proud and to be able to celebrate the collective response of all of those contributions and what they mean when put together and sent to somewhere like Turkey, and Syria. Yeah.
And as you say, a dollar adds up. In this case, to over $64,000, and in the developing world where you work, that money goes a lot further. And our tech enables the full transparency of that funding. So if you go to the care page on the I Equal Change site, you can see how much we've raised across the care projects that we support. So for anyone listening today, owning a company or working with an organisation, I Equal Change makes it simple to give back, to build that into your customer journey online. We've actually just tweaked our technology so professional service firms can also give back. So we're about to sign our first law firm, which is exciting, so they can give back around their invoicing cycle and bring to life their philanthropy, their ESG, their commitment to people and planet. So come on board with us. The season of giving is upon us, Christmas. Support
Yes.
Care's incredible work in Asia Pacific. And this is a time, it's so interesting. I mean, we've been doing this several years, and how much this has become a movement for change, how much consumers are beginning to demand the businesses they support have a bigger story, have purpose baked into the DNA of their organization. And so we see a future very soon where it's less about product and promotion, but it's more about product and purpose.
Yes.
What do you stand for? And I can proudly share that we've now raised over $9 million. It happened just about a week ago.
That's phenomenal. Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's just phenomenal.
No, well, thank you. Look, the congratulations goes to you and goes to our NGO partners and goes to our retailers who are funding it. I mean, you're doing the work on the ground, the hard, complex work of system change and empowering communities. And so this is an example of the power of partnerships and using technology for good. Cath, what keeps you going? What do you most look forward to each day?
What keeps me going? There's never a dull moment. There's never a quiet moment. I think even in the time that we were launching that last appeal that I spoke to you about in terms of the earthquakes in Turkey, there were other crises happening like the next weekend and the following weekend, a cyclone almost skipping the coast of Vanuatu. It's a constant watch and a very agile space. So it's very interesting. It's a fascinating sector to work in because there are no shortages of complexity and no shortages of problems to solve. But like I didn't mention before, but, we're the only Australian organisation that's actively working in Afghanistan to support the education of women and girls. These are really complex things. And you look at that country since the Taliban took over, and you look at what's happening to women and girls, and you see that even this small project of ours, the incredible impact that it's having. And that's exactly what keeps you going, knowing that you're making a huge difference. And, Jeremy, you're absolutely right. Like, we might be the boots on the ground, but it takes an entire community, and it takes everyone contributing that small amount that they can, whether it's $1, it's time, it's whatever, that the collective makes the big impact.
In many years from now, when you look back on your professional life, what do you believe you'll be most proud of?
As I said, like, it's been over 25 years. I think I've been saying 25 years for about 4 years, so it's probably getting close to 30. I've probably raised more than 200 million plus for organisations, but it's not the money. The money is just a means to an end. I think when I look at past organisations that I've worked for, it's been able to save precious bits of the environment. Working with asylum seekers, it's been able to, really provide that support and change law and policy in terms of how Australia deals with immigrants and asylum seekers. And then now at CARE, it's being able to sort of, look at those life-changing programs around women and women's economic empowerment. And, you've got to be happy with that. I think if you look back at the end of your career and sort of said, well, my contribution might have only been small, but, it made a difference. So, yeah, I think I'll be proud.
I love that. I think some people look back and say, I made $200 million for myself. You've made it for other people. And I suspect I know the answer to which is ultimately more rewarding.
Yes, absolutely. Mm.
We have one question that's come in from our listeners today. Can you elaborate on the role of education and empowerment in CARE Australia's programs?
Yeah, so CARE Australia, we have country offices that we work with. So I mentioned Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, etc. So in those countries, education and basic primary education is hugely important. You can go on our website and look at a fantastic program that we run in Timor-Leste called LAFEIC, which is a support structure to primary schools that delivers magazines and content to primary school students. And there's a great video on there, actually, and you can see volunteers carrying the magazines over rivers to deliver to small villages. It's that kind of, those challenges are enormous. But this magazine not only produces education content that doesn't happen in the school, but it's also like a Trojan horse for talking about health issues and proper nutrition. And so it's a thing, it's a resource that the whole family uses. So, we have lots of activities like that. Empowerment is more, clearly we work with gender-based women's organisations to sort of build that women's empowerment message and structures across all levels. But for us, our focus at the moment is really on economic empowerment. So we have, for example, just recently launched in October a micro-lending platform called Lend with Care. And what we try and do is, because 1.4 billion people in the world don't have access to banking. And that seems, sort of like a strange figure, but it means that women who are trying to start up a sewing business or trying to buy more ingredients for their very small market stall, they can't access banking in order to be able to do that and make a living. So we provide loans to these women. They grow their business, they earn a decent livelihood, they repay the loan, and the cycle continues. So that empowerment for us is about women's rights. It's about women's having the ability to make decisions that affect their lives, their ability to earn an income, which is hugely important because that just sort of shifts the dial in sort of deep ingrained discrimination. So that's a bit of a snapshot.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Cath Hoban, Director of Fundraising and Marketing at Care Australia. We don't want to take up any more of your time. You've got to go out and raise another $200 million.
just this afternoon, Jeremy.
Just this afternoon? Yeah,
Exactly.
but we're so
No,
proud
thank
to
you
be
so
supporting.
much. Yeah,
No,
thanks for having us, and just want to for all of your ICL Change folks on the call, just a really great thank you and a huge appreciation for the contribution of so many. It's wonderful, and we hope it continues for a long time.
It's our pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jeremy. Bye.